This series, if you've not been with us through the book of Exodus, called From Bondage to Freedom. And the more time I spend in it, the more I realize that where I started and what I thought we were going to do keeps changing. For example, this week was not really part of any plan that I had to address or speak to. But the longer I stayed in chapter 32 and 33, I just saw something that I thought I wanted to speak to because it spoke to me. And so this one is a little bit of a detour, like most of the rest of their trip has been. Last week, if we could say last week was about anything, last week was about what do you do while you wait on God. But this week has to do with transformation and how does that actually happen in somebody's life. And what I want us to do is look really closely at 3 conversations that Moses has with God. You will see someone different than you saw who began the journey. And it is astonishing as you pay attention to the way in which he engages God at what you see. It's a different man. It is a different man. And what I want us to be asking is, how in the world did he get to this place where he changed so drastically? And then to ask ourselves, how in the world is it possible for that to happen to me? Okay. So as we think about that, let's turn to Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32. Just by way of review, Moses has gone, they're at the Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, and they have reached this place where Moses is going back up and down the mountain. And he's made his 3rd trip. And while he's there at the top on the 3rd trip, God becomes disturbed at what he sees and hears at the bottom of the mountain. You will remember that the people got really tired of waiting. And while they were waiting, they decided to create a new God for themselves, and to worship that God, and to ascribe all glory to that God. And when the true God, Yahweh, sees this, he's a bit upset, to say the least. And he sends Moses back down. Now, he and Moses had been meeting, and he had been giving Moses the commandments that were written on stone by the finger of God, the Scripture says. He had been giving them instruction. He'd been giving them direction. He'd been spending a lot of time with Moses because one of the things that he was wanting to do with the people was to change a sense of how they saw themselves. They were slaves for generations, and he was wanting them to begin to see themselves differently. And we all know that if one is going to begin to live differently, they're going to have to think differently. They're going to have different thoughts. And so these commandments, this covenant, these instructions were intended to restore and renew their mind. And as their minds were renewed, their lives would be renewed, and they would be free people. Now, I've been asking you along the way that one significant question at the beginning: what would it be like for me to be free? That's what he was wanting them to get a picture of. What would it be like for me to be free from my anger, free from my addictions, free from my fears, free from my need to please others, free from the codependent relationships that I have in my life, free from the baggage and the things that hold me down, free to be all that God made me to be. This is what he wanted for his people to understand, that they were slow to get it. Okay? So now they're fashioning a new God under Aaron's leadership. God sends Moses down, and here's what happens in the second part of Exodus chapter 32. Now you'll remember when God sent Moses down that he said, I want you to go down because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt. Remember, he was telling Moses it was his people that he brought. Moses is going to change this direction of that. Moses sought the favor of the Lord. This is verse 11 of chapter 32 of his God. Lord, he said, why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? They're not my kids, they're your kids. Okay? And then he says, why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Now, can you imagine? God is angry, and God wants to destroy the whole lot of them. And the only thing that stands between God destroying these people is Moses. Now, do you remember the nature and character of Moses when he began the journey? He was a very impetuous person. He was an angry person himself. Fear had started to govern his life, and he ran away from his calling. And he spent a long time in the wilderness. And he was shaped by hardship and difficulty. And now he is standing face to face with God, in between God and God's desire to do away with his people. And he's giving back to God. He's telling him, you can't do this. This is your people, not my people. And then he goes on to say, he says, remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land that I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever. He's like, don't you remember? You've been telling me to remember. You've been telling us to remember. Don't you remember? Can you imagine this conversation, this man standing there with God? The God who made, you remember just earlier when God visited them, how the mountain shook, thunder and lightning and trumpet blast and smoke. These are images or pictures of just an awesome God. And there Moses stands in his midst telling him to remember the things that he thought somehow God might have forgotten. Can you believe it? This is Moses, the coward. This is Moses, the man who went back and forth, not sure of his own identity. And he's standing strong in the presence of God, and he's reminding him of things that he promised. And then it says in verse 14, then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster that he had threatened. Because of one man and his courage to stand and to face God and to intercede on behalf of the people, God relented. As I'm reading this, I'm getting to a place where I say to myself, this is what God really wanted from Moses all along. When he chose Moses, this is what he saw. Moses didn't see it, but now he's starting to. And I wonder if in some strange way this isn't some sort of test for Moses. What's he going to do now after all these years that he's logged in the desert? What's he going to do now? Is he going to stand up and mediate between myself and them? Is he going to step into the role that I've been calling him into for all these years? Is it time? Is it finally time? And Moses does. It's amazing. I mean, if you think about it, this is the God who parted the Red Sea. It's the God who brought the plagues on the Egyptians. This is the God who brought food from nowhere, hail out of the sky, manna for years and years, who brought sweet water out of bitter. It's the God who brought water out of rocks. This is an amazingly powerful and astonishing God, and there Moses stands in his presence and says, you can't do it. Remember your promises? See, now Moses is remembering. He's not forgetting. He's holding on to the promises of God, even in the face of great adversity. You can't do this. And God sort of metaphorically steps back and says, okay, you got me. You're right. I won't. It's a powerful, powerful interchange between the two, but it's the first, not the last. I have two more for you, and then I just want to share a couple things that are really significant for you and I think. So he goes back down the mountain, and as he's going back down the mountain, he and Joshua don't understand what's immediately going on. God sees and hears it first, but when he comes down and sees it, Moses is filled with anger. He cannot believe what he sees the people doing, and worse than that it's his brother who's leading the charge. He left his brother responsible for this group of people, to give them some leadership, to give them some direction. He sort of knew what they would do when left to their own devices, but it's his brother. Then he confronts his brother, and his brother makes some lame excuse about how they came and they were going to hurt him, and they brought him this gold and he threw it into the fire, and out came this idol. Right? I mean, it's a laughable exchange. And you can only imagine what Moses must be thinking as he shakes his head and he's just disgusted. And he takes the stone tablets written by the finger of God, the commandments, and he takes and he throws them down and he breaks them. And this is a sign or symbol of the broken covenant. Their relationship has been broken. It's a very graphic picture, right? Now, under the terms of the covenant, you will remember that the people said, everything that God says we will do. Remember that? Everything that God says we will do. They actually even said it twice on 2 different occasions. Under the terms of the covenant, justice would mean that punishment for their breaking the covenant would mean death. Justice would require death. They knew it. And it only took them 40 days to break the covenant. 40 days. Now, 40 days might not seem long to you until you're in a place where you search the skies and you wonder whether God exists, where you lack leadership in your life. I bet you there's been a period of time in your life where you did something, you went back on something you promised or something you thought you were about that you just waited so long that you went back on. You regretted it, but you nevertheless did it. I bet you in a period of 40 days and 40 nights, we've all broken a covenant. Agreements we've made, promises we've made. Let's not be so harsh on these guys. Let's join from alongside them and understand that sometimes when we wait, it's really difficult unless we're grounded in a strong sense of identity as to who we are and who God is and why the wait is worth it. Okay. He goes back down into disaster. It's a mess. Now, after he has this encounter with Aaron, he's going to make his way back up the mountain and he's going to have another conversation with God. And it goes something like this. Exodus chapter 32, verse 30. The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot my name out of the book you have written too." He didn't even like these people. I mean, they constantly complained, right? At every turn, when given a chance, they complained. They revolted. They even plotted to kill him and his brother. You remember? These weren't like good friends. This isn't like a husband-wife relationship he had with these people. They didn't have like a super good relationship. In fact, he was tired of them more often than not. And he finds himself in a place where he's going back to God and he's saying, "You know what you saw and I didn't see when we were up on the mountain last time? You're right. These people are just terrible. But if you're going to get rid of them, then go ahead and just take me too." He was looking to do what he wasn't really in a place to do. Atonement for sin will come later from Lord. This is a sign of what is to come through Jesus Christ. What has happened to this man? This is not the same guy we met when we started on this journey, is it? This is not the same guy. He's standing toe-to-toe with God, and he's telling him and reminding him about what he needs to do and who he is and what he's about. And now he's going up on behalf of the people who were more trouble than not most of the time, and he's saying, "You know what? They did terrible stuff, and I don't blame you if you take them out. But if you take them out, you might as well go ahead and take me too. Don't do it, please." He's standing in the gap. He's trying to atone for the sins of people who can't atone themselves. Something amazing is going on inside of this man. Who is this man? Well, as he continues, there's this passage that begins at the beginning of chapter 33 and verse 1. And it goes like this. It says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. And I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, all the people who live there. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you along the way. God's still not over it. And he knows well these people's character. He says, you know what? I know what I promised. I'm going to give you what I promised. I'm just not going with you anymore. I'll send an angel with you. He said, if I go with you, they might really push me over the edge here. I might really do something I don't want to have to do. So better than do that, I'm going to dispatch an angel and they'll take care of it. Now this is the deepest form of loneliness Moses will have experienced in the entire journey. The thought of going forward into this land of promise without God is more than he can bear. And he will come to God and he will basically say, I don't care about the promised land. Maybe when we started the journey, the thought of getting someplace better than where I was, it mattered to me. This land flowing with milk and honey, this promise, I don't even really care about that anymore. If I lose you, I lose the whole reason for the journey. I can't do it. I won't do it. I won't take another step. So listen to what he says. This is the deepest form of loneliness. He feels abandoned by God in this moment. It's the thing that matters most to him. Listen to what he says down in verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you're pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. For how will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? It doesn't sound like the same man to me. Does it sound like the same Moses to you? Something has changed in him. What is it that has transpired in his life that would have transformed his heart in such a way that he would have had these kinds of conversations with God? He wouldn't have had these years ago. This is interesting to pay attention for you and I, because as we think about our lives and where we are and where we hope to be, we know there's a gap between who we are and who we want to be, between who we are and our best selves. And we can learn something from Moses here if we pay attention to his life. What happened to him that would have caused him to engage God in such a way that we see the differences spelled out? I mean, if you look back over the journey, you will see that basically the man has lived in a hard place for a long time, 40 plus years. At every turn there has been trial and difficulty and disappointment. It's been his life. The better part of his life has been shaped by hardship. What is it that has changed this man? You know, it has been said of the desert or the wilderness place that it is a place where faith goes to die. And that is true. But it is also a place where faith can flourish. The difference between whether it dies or thrives are the choices we make when we hit those hard spots. Transformation in our lives really has to do not with anything that surrounds us, our circumstances or situations or things beyond our control. Transformation will occur or it won't occur depending on what we do when we find ourselves in those moments where we're forced with making a significant choice. Moses was shaped by solitude and silence. Moses was shaped in the wilderness, in the desert, in the alone places. Moses was shaped by his responsiveness in that place, solitude and silence, in turning to God and communing with God and working things out with God. For you and me, sometimes when we hit those hard spots, we become resistant. We become angry. We become bitter. We become resentful. We become a different person, and our faith goes to the wilderness to die. Moses has thrived because over a period of time he knew that God was carving out something in him. And when he hit those quiet, lonely places, he didn't busy himself. He didn't run from it. He turned into it, and he opened up to it. And God did a work in his life that changed him. He moved into becoming the person that God saw in the first place. And what I want to say to you guys is that when we walk through these places that we least want to be, the hard places, the dry places, the difficult places, that transformation is very possible. It isn't a given that it will happen, but it can happen if you and I make the right choice. What is the right choice in solitude? What is the right choice when we hit that spot? Moses shows us over and over and over again as he turns to God that he's not going to allow the circumstance to drive him from. He's going to choose to allow the circumstance to drive him to God. Moses is willing to mix it up with God. He's willing to be his best and worst self. He's willing to be angry in God's presence. He's willing to tell him off. He's willing to speak his mind. He's willing to share it all. And I think sometimes some of us get to a place where we're maybe afraid to do that, or we've been taught that we shouldn't do that. Listen, if God can't handle that stuff, who can handle that stuff? Through Moses' life, we see a lot of things that God showed favor to the man. Why? Because he was a man who was seeking after God. Seeking to walk with him, to know him, and to be led by him. And he gets to this place where he says, you know what? I don't care about any success over our enemies. Drive out all the people from that land that you want. I don't care about entering into this rich, prosperous land. I don't need to have a lot of money. I don't need to have a lot of possessions. I don't need to be the most successful leader on the face of the earth. I don't want any of that if it means I can't have you. Don't ever sacrifice intimacy with God for anything else. It's not worth it. And Moses just says, listen, do what you're going to do, but I'm not going anywhere here. I'm going with you. Imagine the courage and the strength of character it took to stand in the face of the God who parted the seas and to have that discussion. Man, are you kidding? Take it or leave it. But he's finally grown into the person that God wanted him to be, the mediator who stood between himself and the people. He's finally growing up. Now here's something you probably won't want to hear. This took a long time. Prior to the time that they had been out as a people, they'd been there for just, somewhere between 3 months and a year now. But prior to that, he'd spent 40 years in the wilderness himself. But finally, his identity is being forged as a person of God. You hear it when he says what he says at the end of that passage in Exodus 33. He says, how will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? We're yours. And if you don't go with us, then whose are we? He's not vacillating now in his identity, is he? Some of us struggle in that area of identity. We fill our lives with so many things, hoping that those things will fill us up, make us feel better. like chasing the wind. Moses says, I've chased the wind long enough. I don't even care about the promised land anymore. I really don't. If you're not going, I'm not going. I will sacrifice nothing else on behalf of the intimacy I have known with you. It's an amazing transformation that takes place. Let me finish the story and then we'll be done for today. So then the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name. Then Moses said, now, show me your glory. I need more than your words. Show me the money. Show me your glory. I need more than your words. I need more than that. Is this a little bold to you? What a man. I mean, flawed and frail and full of imperfections. But man, how he has grown. And now he stands in the presence of God saying, I need more than your words. I want to see your glory. And God says, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence, and I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. God's goodness is his greatest glory. For the last couple of chapters, God's been angry. It's not been pleasant. And Moses has had to mediate between this angry God and this sinful people. And now Moses is saying, I need something from you, because I am wrung out. And I don't think I can go one step further. I need to see your glory. And God says, I'll go one step better. I'm going to show you my goodness. Because my greatest glory is my goodness. And I am merciful, and I am compassionate, and I'm going to show you that it is going to pass before you. What transpired there in those 2 chapters changed Moses forever. As you follow the story out, you will see that as he goes to meet with God, they will create a tabernacle or a special meeting place. Thank God Moses won't have to keep going up and down the mountain. I mean, he's 80 years old. Enough is enough. You know. So they get this meeting place outside the camp, and every time that Moses goes in, when he comes out, his face is so shining with brilliance that people can't even look at him, and he has to wear a veil. It shows on his face the glory of God. His presence with God is so powerful that it gives witness and testimony to God's goodness, and it's all over him. And it changes him as a person. He'll be different forever. Will he still wrestle with some sin patterns that have been with him his whole life? He will. He'll still have to deal with some of the anger issues that he has, and some of those anger issues will actually disqualify him from entering into the promised land. We'll talk about that later. But it's amazing what transpires in this man. And so when I was looking at this wasn't originally something I was going to speak to. I just thought, this is a guy who started the journey was about the least likely person you could ever imagine to do what God was calling him to do. And if you'll remember, he really didn't even want to do it. He wanted anybody else to do it. He couldn't yet see himself as God saw him. And God knew that he was going to have to use some extreme elements to bring out the best in Moses. Now, it isn't a given that when God uses extreme elements to do it, that will. But he was banking on Moses. And so he exposed him to things that Moses wanted no part of. And I think he does the same for you and me. I think there's a lot of stuff in our lives that if we had a chance, we wouldn't choose it. I think there are a lot of places along the way that we look at our lives and we wonder, how do we quick exit, perhaps what I might suggest to you is maybe the choices that you make while you're in the wilderness hard place might in fact be more about the shaping of your character than it is about getting you out soon. Because you and I know, if we're honest with ourselves, there's stuff in our lives that just need to be transformed. There's just stuff that we've picked up along the way it's not serving us well. And most of the time, we don't willingly give that stuff up. We have to have it pressed out of us. And that's what happened with Moses. And so I think, if there's no less likely person for that to happen to, well then why couldn't it happen to me, or you, or us? See, because when you get to that place where life isn't what you want it to be, you do have some choices. You really, truly do. And perhaps rather than wanting to get out, maybe if you make the right choices, you will learn like Moses that God's presence is greater than any promised land you'll ever get to. Moses so changed in his life that he didn't even really care about the promised land anymore. He really, truly didn't. Some of us have in mind a picture of a life that we want. We do. And it looks different than what it looks like right now for most of us. And we are hungry to find that life and to know it. And I just want to say to you, don't sacrifice intimacy with God for anything, even the promise of that kind of life you've been dreaming of for years and years and years. Because nothing's worth losing the presence of God. No amount of success, no amount of money or possessions, no other relationship. There's really nothing. And so, if these two passages are about anything for me, they're about me lingering with this question: how did this man get here? This is a different man. And then ask the question, how do I get there? Because I want to be like that. I want to be able to stand in the presence of God with my best and worst self and have it out. I want to be in the presence of God and have the boldness to say, I need to see your glory. I want to be able to be willing to lay down my life on behalf of people who maybe haven't been the kindest to me, who wouldn't be the most likely candidates for me to do so. This man is a different man, and all of his life has been shaped through hardship. He's been in the desert for most of his life. But he hasn't come out bitter. He's really come out better. He's come out a different person. And his life would be forever changed. And whenever he would meet with God, it would show all over him. It'd be so bright people couldn't even stand to look at it. He'd have to wear a veil until that presence passed. And that's how I want to be. And I think that's probably how you want to be too. I want to say this as I close. Don't sacrifice anything that will keep you from your intimacy with God. Nothing's worth it. Nothing. And if you make it your aim or your business to cultivate the kind of intimacy that Moses had, making choices when they're hard, I think you can have what he had. I think you can know what he did. Because God has a call in your life too. And it is significant, and it is important, and it is of great worth and value. He wants you to live into the person he made you to be in the first place. So don't let hardship ruin that. Let hardship help you to make choices that will lead you into the place that God made you to be, the person who made you to be. Read chapter 32 and 33 this week. It's an amazing transformation. And it's one that's there for the taking for you and me. It really, truly is. The question for us is, what are we going to do when we hit those spots in the places that we least want to be? How we answer that question will shape our character and our destiny. And that's something you need to think about as we close. Let's do so. to be as real to you and in your presence as Moses was. We see in these scriptures that you are not distant and removed. You are not uncaring. You are not unconcerned. Sometimes you are a God that we don't know what to do with. But as we wrestle with our own emotions and feelings, let us wrestle with them in your presence. As we turn to you, mold and shape us in the ways that you originally designed, that we might live life and know it to the full. God, one day we'll give thanks for these places that we're in, that we've so often begged out of. Because we will know that these places have been for your good purposes in our lives to be revealed. Now help us just to respond to them in the best way that we can. And in advance we'll give you thanks.